The desert sun burned like fire on the backs of men who labored. The dust rose in clouds with every passing horse, and the town of Dry Creek lingered in its eternal silence, waiting for the next story to unfold, because every western town had its legends, and every legend began with a stranger. On one searing afternoon, as the saloon doors creaked and the piano stumbled through a broken tune, a woman walked in, boots heavy, coat torn by travel, hat pulled low to shadow her face, and eyes that glowed with a fire no man could tame. She was not ordinary, and the room knew it instantly. Gamblers froze mid-bet. The bartender set down his rag, and the sheriff's hand twitched toward his holster. Because she wasn't just another traveler, she was danger wrapped in silence. A storm caged in human form. No one saw at first the knife tucked into her boot, sharp steel polished by too many nights of survival. But everyone felt the weight of her presence. The kind of presence that turned conversation into whispers. She walked like she had already fought battles none of them could imagine, and she stared like she had no intention of asking permission to exist. Across the room sat Jace Callahan, a cowboy with a reputation as quiet as it was steady, a man who carried the dust of the land on his boots and the calm of the horizon in his eyes. He watched her, not like the others did, not with suspicion or fear, but with curiosity, because where others saw a dangerous stranger, Jace saw a soul burning to survive, a fire too bright to snuff out. Their eyes met only once, and for a fleeting moment, something unspoken passed between them. Something heavy enough to anchor her. Steps yet fragile, enough she quickly looked away. She slammed coins on the counter for whiskey, her hand steady though her heart betrayed her with the faintest tremor. That night, as the desert wind howled outside and the stars glimmered with secrets above, the legend of Dry Creek had found its opening line, because a woman with fire in her eyes had come, carrying not only a blade hidden in her boot, but a storm in her heart. And Jace Callahan, the quiet cowboy, had already decided he would not let that storm pass without stepping into it. Days passed, and her name, reluctantly shared, was Elena, though even the sound of it seemed heavy on her tongue, as if names were burdens, not gifts. She moved through Dry Creek like a shadow, refusing to settle, never staying in one place too long, never letting her back face a door. She ate alone, drank like the whiskey was water, and spoke rarely. But Jace noticed things others missed, the twitch in her fingers when someone stepped too close, the way her boots never shifted far from the ground as though she needed them anchored, and most of all the bulge at her ankle, where the knife slept, always ready. That blade was not just protection. It was her history, carved into steel, sharpened by betrayal, polished by nights where death had been closer than dawn. Rumors swelled in the town like dust storms, whispering she was an outlaw, whispering she was a fugitive, whispering she had blood on her hands from men who once thought themselves invincible. But Jace didn't listen to rumors. He watched her. One night beneath the desert sky, she spoke pieces of truth, her voice brittle like glass but edged with steel. She had been betrayed by the man she trusted most, left for dead with wounds no one could see, and in that betrayal she learned the world only respected strength carved by one's own hand. The knife became her shield, her reminder, her survival, her vow never to kneel again. Jace didn't pity her. Pity was poison she would never drink. He simply listened with the patience of the desert, with silence that didn't demand but understood. Slowly he became the only man who didn't flinch at her fire, who didn't warn others away from her shadow, and the only man she didn't immediately push away. Still, Dry Creek was a place that judged swiftly and feared deeply. The townsfolk muttered warnings, telling Jace not to involve himself with a storm that would only burn him down. But Jace was not a man to fear fire. He was a man who saw that sometimes the only way to survive the desert was to stand in the flames and not run. And so quietly, without promises or declarations, Elena stayed longer than she intended. Her knife always ready, her fire always smoldering, but her guard slowly, dangerously, beginning to bend in his presence. It was during the harvest gathering, when the town gathered for music, whiskey, and false laughter, that Elena's fire erupted for all to see. She had tried to disappear into the crowd, her hat low, her knife still hidden in her boot. But fate does not leave storms to sleep quietly. Trouble arrived in the form of 3 men, their voices loud, their boots heavy, their grins cruel, men who knew her from a past she had bled to leave behind. They called her name like a curse, mocked her scars, and demanded debts in front of the town. debts they knew she would never pay. The crowd fell silent, waiting for the inevitable. Because Dry Creek was a town starved for violence as much as for bread, and no one wanted to miss a storm breaking open. Elena's hand moved before her breath could steady, and in one motion the knife was out, flashing like lightning under lantern light. The men laughed, arrogant, guns at their belts, certain she was no threat. But they had never faced the fury in her eyes. Fury of a woman who had been beaten, betrayed, and risen from the ashes with nothing left to lose. The fight was not long, but it was unforgettable. She moved with precision, a blade honed by pain and memory, cutting through arrogance as easily as flesh. By the end, 2 men were down in the dirt groaning, and the third fled with blood soaking his shirt, swearing vengeance. The crowd gasped, torn between awe and fear, staring at Elena as though she were not flesh and bone but storm and fire. And in that silence, and when every man stepped back, Jace stepped forward. He didn't reach for his gun. He didn't flinch from the blood. He simply met her eyes, steady as stone, and said words that cut deeper than any blade. "Stay." For a heartbeat, the world froze. She stood trembling, knife in hand, fire blazing in her gaze, expecting rejection, exile, fear. But instead, Jace had given her something no one had ever dared to give her before: acceptance. Not despite her fire, but because of it. Staying was the hardest battle Elena had ever fought. Running was easy, survival was simple. But staying meant trust, and trust was a weapon that had once left her bleeding. Every dawn she woke with her knife close. Every night she fought the urge to vanish into the horizon. Yet Jace's presence tethered her like roots she never knew she had. Life on his ranch was quiet but demanding, filled with work that steadied her restless spirit, filled with silences that did not condemn but healed. Jace gave her no promises he couldn't keep, only steady actions. Steady patience, steady belief. She still carried fire in her eyes, still woke from nightmares with a blade in her grip, still flinched at the memory of betrayal. But for the first time in years, she found herself wanting to fight for something other than survival. Dry Creek never fully embraced her, but they learned to respect her, because she stood at Jace's side not as his shadow but as his equal. And one evening, as the sun melted into crimson over the desert, Jace turned to her and with quiet certainty said, "You don't have to run anymore." "Not here, not with me." Her throat burned. Her eyes stung with tears she had buried for too long, and for the first time, she slid her knife back into her boot, not out of fear but out of choice, not as armor but as memory. Elena had carried steel and fire across deserts, had faced betrayal and blood, had been seen as a storm too fierce to tame. But now, with Jace's steady gaze holding her, she chose the bravest act of all. She stayed. And in that choice her legend was born, not of violence or vengeance, but of a fire that found its place in the heart of a cowboy who refused to let it burn alone. If Elena's fire and Jace's quiet strength moved you, if you felt every heartbeat of danger, survival, and courage, then don't let this story fade here. Subscribe now to the channel for more powerful tales of love, resilience, and redemption. Every click keeps the fire alive, and together, we'll keep these legends burning brighter than ever.